Welcome back, and today is part 3 of the series. If you've missed the first 2 pieces, you can click on the link below and go back and see what I've done in those 2 portions. And today is the final wrap-up of what we're doing. Okay, today is the final pour. This is the 3rd part of this project. I'm mixing up my resin. Today I'm going to be covering the beach portion with resin. So measuring extremely carefully. I'm mixing enough resin today to do all 3 of my pieces together, all poured at the same time. So mixing, today there is no coloring agent going into the resin. This is going to be completely clear. And because of that, you'll see it may seem like I'm mixing and mixing and mixing, because in theory I am. Because I'm not adding any coloring agent, I'm not doing more mixing to ensure to have that coloring agent incorporated. Instead, I need to make sure that my resin is thoroughly mixed. I don't want to see any streaks in the resin. When you're mixing resin together, one portion is heavier than the other. So the mixing, the scraping of the sides, the cleaning of your tool, and just really making sure you are happy and content with how your resin looks and how well it's mixed. Now I've got some shells and rocks, and I've got a starfish, all part of the beach. These I have glued down. And again, I've glued them down initially just to hold them in place, just enough glue so that they won't move when I'm putting the resin on. The resin goes over top of each one of the shells. I want to make sure everything is completely covered. And once the resin hardens, it acts like a glue, and these shells will not go anywhere. They will all be completely covered. The resin will run down the sides and seal them up. So I'm going to go over top of each of these pieces and make sure that I've covered each shell, each of the little rocks. Everything is completely covered before I put the rest of the resin onto my beach area. And that part of the reason is I want to make sure I have enough resin mixed up to cover everything thoroughly. I don't want to come back and find, oh, I missed a spot. I want to make sure everything is covered. And going on to the next piece. And it's just gonna, the resin's just gonna flow down each of these, and it's gonna start to spread out onto the beach portion, which is absolutely fine because I will be spreading resin throughout the rest of the beach area. Now these window panes are from a very old window. These will be placed back in the frame once this is all completed. But because they're such old windows, they're a very thin glass. The glass is not cut straight. You may have noticed the one corner is chipped off. So they've got a lot of character to them, and want to be very careful working with them because they are pretty fragile. So been extremely careful to have them placed on my table where they would not be bumped, where I would not be moving them. And you don't want to be moving them anyways when you're working with resin and doing several pours. This is the 3rd day of pouring, so these boards need to be sitting perfectly level just to keep the resin so that it doesn't pool and that it flows and gives that nice finish at the end. So just going over top of each of the shells. Some of the shells are bigger than others. I've got this awesome little starfish, just adding more character to the whole overall piece. And part of it is to seal each of these pieces up, but also to make sure that they're sealed into the overall piece of glass, that they are attached and They are not going to be moving anywhere. We want that nice finish over the top so they've got that shine on them, just like the rest of the window pane has. So the ocean portion now is completed. That's had time to set up overnight and harden. These pieces will sit for at least a week before I will move them. I want to ensure the resin is completely cured. So here I'm just going to go back over and now start filling in the rest of the beach area. All the area that's away from the shells. We need everything to be covered, and I'm going to take that resin on each of these right up to the second wave. I want to do it up to the second wave and not just to the first wave. The second wave is a thicker wave because it's poured over the first wave, and I want this resin to bump up right against that, just to give a nice look once it all sets up and dries. So just taking the resin, splitting it up between the 3 different panes, making sure I'm happy with the coverage. I have mixed extra resin to make sure that I had enough to cover everything. You don't want to be running short with your resin when you're doing any project, because you can't add to it, you know, once you're pouring. You have to wait until it sets and then do another level over top. So resin is not inexpensive, so you want to plan out well in advance how much resin you need for the area that you're covering. And that's, you know, that's again a lot of the planning. You need to plan out your piece. Something like this, as I've said, this is my largest piece that I have poured, and calculating out how much resin I need to cover the space properly, making sure I have picked out my colors, that I've thought out the whole process so that there are no surprises when I get moving and starting to pour resin. I know exactly what I'm going to be doing for my first wave. You know, I planned out my colors, how many I was going to do, how much resin I needed for each color, how I was going to lay them on the board. All of those things are just things you need to plan. You need to be organized. You need to know what you're doing. You don't want to waste your resin, and you don't want to do anything that's going to compromise the piece you're working on. You don't want to waste this because it's not inexpensive. So smoothing it all out, making sure I've got all of the sand covered. And again, I'm always watching to see if I see any little pieces of lint, pushing the resin up to the edge of that second wave. So I'm covering the first wave over. And this is clear resin, so you can see it perfectly underneath. It's very visible. It's just sealing it up so that you've got the resin to be a little bit smoother looking up to the second wave. And there's that corner that's got a little chip in it on that particular piece. But that gets covered up with the frame, so that's not going to be a problem for the finished portion. And just going back and moving it all, making sure everything is covered. I want all of the beach to be covered. I want to make sure all my shells and rocks are covered. This just seals everything. When you have a resin piece, something that you need to be aware of is resin does not like direct sunlight. It does not like extreme heat. So when your finished product is done, you need to ensure that these things are not going to be in direct sunlight. It can affect the finish of your resin. If it's in a lot of heat, the resin will soften. So being aware, resin does dry very hard, but it's not invincible. But it does give a lovely finish. It really does give a very clean, shiny, nice finish, and the colors of the water become almost iridescent, and they do have a little bit of a shimmer in them, so that gives a little bit of a nice look when you're looking at it from different angles. And again, just I'm using my fingers and spreading it out, getting it out to the edge. You can just see how liquidy it is. It's really not setting up at all just yet. I still have lots of time to still work with it and spread it around. Going back, just checking all of the 3 pieces to make sure I'm happy with how it's looking, that I've covered right out to the edges, that all of the shells are covered, that the resin is right up against them, or that it's flowed down from pouring it over the top of them, down around the edges of them. And I'm going to take my heat gun, and this time of course we're not blowing any waves. All I'm doing is just taking and removing any little bubbles. And I don't want to blow too much over any of the shells. I want the resin to be covering those. So it's just removing bubbles. And doing it across all 3 pieces. And there's some neat little shells on there. There's different things. There's some little colored rocks on there. Some bigger shells, different types of shells, different colors, without getting too busy. And taking out more bubbles. And then I'm just double checking all of them for any flaws, and get my torch out. And the torch really does take out more bubbles. It just works great. The heat gun is pretty good, but the torch really does take out any of those little microscopic bubbles. You may not see them, but they are there, and as the resin thickens, they can create little spots that don't disappear. So you want them to all be popped and taken out of your resin. So that gives you the smooth finish that you're looking for. And moving quickly. You don't need to linger. You will see the bubbles popping when you're doing it. Moving quickly, so there is no fires, no smoke. And then I'm going to come back, because as I'm looking at this, I'm not quite happy with what I see as far as how the resin is flowing up to the second wave. I'm seeing a small gap in some spots. So I'm going to get my little wood tool, and I'm going to go just along the edge of that second wave, and that's just going to smooth out the resin right up against that second wave, just to make sure there are no gaps there to make sure the resin flows right up tight to the second wave. So that's finishing up the third pour and finishing up this project. And that's it. Thank you very much for joining me and spending time seeing how I do my resin work. If you want to learn more about how to do this or see some of the things that I've created, you can go to my Facebook page, Rustic and Shine Resin Designs. Thank you so much.